we've lost a lot of pieces of what makes us human. They're in there, we see them, but we've kind of marginalized them and moved them over to the side. And we need to bring them back into a richer experience of what human intelligence is all about. Kids don't want to go to school anymore because school isn't engaging them in those authentic problems. What do? We take the phones away. Okay. I mean, that is just like banning AI. It's just kicking the can down the road. Over time, we have tended to move intelligence and our definitions of intelligence more in the direction of who can compute, who can represent things linguistically, who can use logic well. But there's a lot more to human intelligence.
Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited about this week's episode because we're joined by an old friend of ours and somebody who we hold in really high regard, Dr. Alan Coverstone. He's an educator, leader, and consultant with more than 30 years of experience in K-12 and higher education. Alan has served as a teacher, debate coach, senior program officer at the Gates Foundation, innovation leader for Metro Nashville Public Schools, and chair of the education department at Belmont University. And he now works as director of regional partnerships for the National Speech and Debate Association. Later this month, Alan will be visiting the University of Mary Washington to give a talk titled Reclaiming Human Intelligence in the Age of AI, Plural Futures for Education and Society. So today, we'll preview some of those themes from that talk and also dive into the larger questions about AI, education, and how faculty can adapt to some of the changes ahead. Alan, thanks for being here with us. We really look forward to it.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Excellent. So why don't we start? Tell us a little bit for those of us that are really looking forward to the talk at Mary Washington at the end of October. Give us a 30-second preview. What can we expect? What can we have to look forward to?
Well, I think that I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence from the standpoint of the question, what is intelligence? Because over time, we have tended to move intelligence and our definitions of intelligence more in the direction of who can compute, who can represent things linguistically, who can use logic well. And those are all the roots of what artificial intelligence is built on today. But there's a lot more to human intelligence than just our ability to represent things linguistically and compute and draw logical conclusions, although those are important things, and those are things that are valued in society. And so I'll ask the question, what are those other things? Are those other things affected by the move toward artificial intelligence? And frankly, if we consider intelligence in a limited and narrow way, are we losing sight of opportunities that humans have, as well as ways that we can change our education systems and even think about the purpose of liberal arts education in the future, even in a future where artificial intelligence is becoming ubiquitous?
That's fantastic. Now, in the title, you talk about reclaiming human intelligence. What does reclaiming mean to you in this context?
Well, I think I alluded there just a bit, but human intelligence is multifaceted, and I do draw a lot of my original thinking about this from Howard Gardner's concepts of multiple intelligence, and that's a concept that's been kind of applied in different ways in schools, particularly in K-12 schools. But I don't think we've necessarily grappled fully with what he's really saying when he talks about multiple intelligences. And so a lot of times people said, well, there's musical intelligence, there's spatial intelligence, there's bodily kinesthetic intelligence, and interpersonal, intrapersonal intelligences. And we've sort of thought of those really as like proclivities or capabilities that people have. And so a lot of times we've seen schools say, okay, well, this student is not doing very well in math and reading, but this person is great with an instrument, so they must have musical intelligence. So we'll let them do music instead of math and reading. And I don't think that's exactly the way that multiple intelligences should be conceived of. Human intelligence is diverse. It's plural. We have lots of ways that we know things about the world, but we have trouble seeing beyond the ways of knowing the world that are most prominent and most valued in our schools and in our society. And that means logical deduction, computation, drawing conclusions that are based on linguistic representations and interpersonal communication that is structured in that format, as opposed to interpersonal communication that might happen on a Friday evening when you're out with your friends. And so thinking about the intelligence of humans as multifaceted and broad, and then looking at what we have defined intelligence as, which is narrow and singular, I think we should reclaim the more multifaceted and broad ways of knowing that humans bring to all of our experiences. And so the musical student shouldn't be set aside from computation. They should learn computational skills and linguistic representational skills, but we should be doing more to explore what we can learn and what we can know about what it means to be a human and how humans interact with the world. And we should start to try to figure out, well, what is musical intelligence, and how do we know things musically that are different from how we know things computationally? And so this suggests, as I think the move toward artificial intelligence generally does, that we have a lot of work to do if we're going to continue to pursue learning, if we're going to continue to pursue human development, and ultimately if we're going to try to find a good place for humans in this world where that computational skill and ability, and frankly the scale of computation that can be done by artificial intelligence is going to far outstrip, and probably already has far outstripped, what any individual human or even a group of humans working together and poring over the data could do themselves. So reclaiming that human intelligence, my thesis is we've lost a lot of pieces of what makes us human. They're in there, we see them, but we've kind of marginalized them and moved them over to the side. And we need to bring them back into a richer experience of what human intelligence is all about, so that artificial intelligence is one form of intelligence and one way of knowing that we can use within that broader human experience.
It seems that schools have kind of focused on this, computational intelligence, how much whoever knows the most wins, right? These kind of reasoning, maybe intelligence at a broad level for two reasons. One, they're measurable. I mean, reason's a little harder to measure, but, we've gotten better at measuring that. Content is obviously not, how much somebody knows is not that hard to measure, or at least less difficult to measure. And then the second, that they have economic value, right? I mean, people, just your standard professions, right? Doctors, lawyers, right? People who work in finance tend to make the most money, just basic law of supply and demand, right? There's fewer people who can do that at the highest level. So we kind of prioritized in education developing those intelligences for those reasons. And I'm wondering, with all the, not just work you've done, so to speak, in education, but you've had a lot of different educational experiences, right? In K-12 and university, charter schools, part of a public school system, private schools. I wondered if there's a way to kind of articulate the value of these new intelligences beyond their, like, well, AI struggles with these, right? So we should maybe focus on these. How can you help kind of make arguments? I don't know if that's the word I want, but to kind of persuade schools, or convince schools that we need to develop these intelligences beyond developing humans, because that's important, but that seems to sometimes get shifted to the wayside when we're focused on kind of the economics and what's measurable.
Yeah. I mean, I think backing up beyond that question is, it's true that, these forms of intelligence have economic value and are measurable, but it's also true that what we define as economically valuable and measurable is these forms of intelligence. And so I don't think it's inevitable that we can't measure. I just think measurement, as we describe it, is a logical deductive conclusion that is drawn from indicators that we see, which we're very familiar with. And I think the reason that we've accelerated that largely has to do with our technologies. I think the what we value and so on has been accelerated ever since the printing press. Why do we care about words? Why do we store written words as a way of maintaining our knowledge, and then whoever masters most of the written words is defined as intelligence? That's our technology. And as we've gotten into the computer age, where the logical deduction and manipulation of those ideas and words has been accelerated, and we're able to do it at faster paces, then we placed a higher value on those kinds of deductions as well. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, but I just think it's narrow. And the reasons to develop the broader human potential are, we have no idea what we're capable of. Look at the things we've done in this one area of intelligence by focusing on it for basically our human history, our written human history, and moving to the point where now we've created tools that can do that better than we can. And, where do we go from there? Was that our whole goal, or do we have more to human experience? And could we organize our societies differently? Could we value things differently if we were developing those things? Yeah, I think they'd have more monetary value and those sorts of things. But beyond that, my idea or my thinking about pluralism in human intelligence is that human intelligence is in these various areas, and maybe others that we would discover if we put time into it. I think we all have them, or at least some versions of them, but they're just underdeveloped. And some people develop their musical intelligence or their bodily kinesthetic intelligence at a much higher level. And, we see them on Sunday afternoon on NFL games, or we see them at the Philharmonic. And, there are certainly people who have developed their logical deductive intelligences just as much as their musical intelligences. And they can bring solutions and bring ideas and perspectives that we, don't spend a lot of time on, because we don't spend any time dealing with those intersections. And we don't typically ask people to learn and grow all of their intelligences at once. So it's a tall order, and it's a little abstract. I understand that. So I don't walk to the schools today and say, here you go. But I do think that some of our activities that involve dialogue, discussion, interaction, debate, those things create opportunities for us to engage more of our faculties than just our logical deductive faculties. Now, it's true that a lot of those activities are, more highly value those that are more deductive. But I think interaction and working with people who are different, listening to people who are different, forging conclusions, descriptions, understandings with people who are different can help to start to expand our brain. But think about how we do it in school. We have a body of knowledge. You're supposed to know the body of knowledge. We tell teachers they're supposed to deliver the body of knowledge. And then we say, if you're not doing so effectively, you must not be an effective teacher. And same for students. If you're not learning it effectively, you're not an effective student. Or really what we tell them is you're not intelligent. And we marginalize them. And a lot of the inequities and divisions that we see and marginalizations that we see, I think have to do with the fact that we're only prioritizing one way of knowing things. If we interact, if we build solutions together, we're going to get the benefit of a lot more perspectives, and we're going to learn things that we just don't even know what they are at this point.
What you're outlining is certainly something that's fairly provocative for most traditional educators, and to think about how do we re-envision this. But it seems like AI, the introduction of AI, the disruption caused by AI presents an opportunity for that. And speaking to some of your past experiences, you've worked at education at so many levels, from K-12, higher education, even when you work with the Gates Foundation to view the educational enterprise. From those different vantage points, how do you see AI, maybe start with this, how do you see AI changing the day-to-day experiences of students? And then, maybe what does that present as an opportunity to offer this new vision for how we view intelligence?
Yeah, I think AI has already changed the everyday experience of students. I just don't think we see the implications of it much in our classes because we still spend time trying to do the same things by and large. And I'm, taking broad swipes. There are certainly individual teachers, individual classes, and groups of, schools and places where they are dealing with this differently. And they are asking students to use the tools in order to figure out what they can engage, what they need to know in that setting. I think at the very least, we have to acknowledge that the tools will be ubiquitous and students will be using them in their future careers. And we don't necessarily know what those careers will look like or how they'll be shaped. And so to me, the core function of our schools should be to prepare students for their future. And we have kind of historically thought, well, we should identify the careers and then we should train them for those careers. And that's made a little bit of sense for sure. But if we don't know the careers, what we could arm students with is the power of agency. And so we need students to be able to understand who they are, and what they know. They need to develop their own voice. They need to discover that they have a voice. They need to learn how to use that voice in a collaborative way so that they can build agency to shape the kinds of communities, the kinds of careers, and the kinds of opportunities that they'll have in the future. So I think first answer to that question is to look forward and say we need to be preparing students to have agency over their future in a world where AI is ubiquitous. That means they have to use it in their classroom setting, and I think there's two choices there. We can get them to use it to solve authentic problems that they're collaborating with, so that we're sort of giving them a laboratory to practice the kinds of things they'll have to do once they leave high school or once they leave college. And that practice, if it's collaborative and interdisciplinary and actually has authentic kind of community-based challenges on the table, and that would include like how do we adapt to AI? That kind of AI literacy could be subject matter in and of itself. As if they do that, and I'm right about, and Howard Gardner's right about intelligence being multiple, this will give us opportunities to develop those multiple capacities, and the things that they learn and know will come from that, and new ideas will emerge, new approaches will emerge. They will we say a lot that we need to keep humans in the loop and make sure AI serves us, but if that's just a choice, then it's just kind of like going on a diet. I can lose weight if I want, because all I got to do is, I know the mechanics of it. I got to stop eating. Well, if the problem is AI is too dominant, well, just don't use it. And that's just not practical. Not that it's not being used, but other people will use it. And the question of like, what does it mean to use it? So I think we need more authentic practice and organic practice in our schools all the way through. Does this mean we shouldn't, learn knowledge and content and so on? I don't think so. I think it's important to do that, but intelligence is not the ability to spout that back and say, like I've now mastered the content in this discipline. Intelligence is really the ability to bring all of our human capacities to bear in collaboration with others on solving problems using what we know. So, for example, math facts or something of that nature. We might say, well, you need to learn all the math facts, and you need to learn, how math works. You need to do 100 math problems so that you understand how it works, so that when you see an answer or you see a problem or you see a representation, you can at least say, it rings true, it doesn't, I'd ask here, you know where to tear it apart. I think the conceptual aspects of how things work, how math works and how it represents things, those are still super important. And so, when you look at it like that, why would a student use AI to generate an answer if the point is not the answer, but what do you understand about the concepts? Where would you tackle this problem to find out if it's accurate or not? Where would you go to tear it apart or interrogate it to determine if it's true, if it's trustworthy, if it's reliable or not? So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about as we think about kind of the practical side of schools.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that struck me, as I've thought about this more over time, I was in a school for a debate tournament earlier in the year, and we were kind of hanging out in the kind of the storage room, and it seemed to be in the English wing, and I noticed, they had all these, novels kind of one place, and all these books, and it really hit me that kind of every student was kind of expected to learn the same thing, and read the same books. And it kind of struck me. It never. It's always been that way. I don't know why it struck me. It took me so long. I'm in my 50s to be odd, right? There's obviously this idea of kind of a common history, common purpose, right? So okay, maybe everyone reads The Great Gatsby, so we know what the 1920s are like, right? But it seems that in this world, there needs to, I don't know where to draw the lines, or if there are lines that can be drawn, there probably are none, right? That we need some common knowledge, but we also need to develop who we are and our own interests, right? And why everybody should maybe in at least sometimes, right, be reading different novels, in studying some different history, right? So that they have a unique experience that they can take and apply to a problem, right? They've kind of learned something. Oh, I read this novel. Oh, I get this idea, and you don't really do that so explicitly, right? You don't say like probably, well, I got this idea from this novel and apply it to this problem, right? But you kind of take all your experiences kind of together, and kind of that's how it works. And it seems like we need a greater diversity of kind of student experiences, but they would all still be reading, right? And gaining the experience with reading. So I'm wondering, what your thoughts are on that and how you might be able to actualize it.
Well, I guess my thoughts are that through technology and our communication technology explosions since the space age, you know, those artifacts that you could read from a canon of literature belong to a specific culture. And we've used them to transfer a specific culture through the generations. So, what we have in common is we all read The Great Gatsby. Well, that's not exactly the check, but it is that when we say flappers, we know what we mean, or when we say, something about West Egg or whatever, right? I can get off The Great Gatsby, but at any rate, we all have sort of a set of common experiences, and that's what makes us common. And that's also then what sets up, like, well, if you don't know all of that, then you're not as intelligent as we are. Well, I mean, you're not as you don't have the same culture as I have. But, the reality is, as you were just kind of beginning to probe, we all have different cultural backgrounds and experiences. I mean, certainly experiences. No two people have had the exact same set of experiences or made the same things out of them, or, understood them from the same balance of their multiple intelligences. All of those things are different. And so we need to have ways to interact with each other and learn with each other and solve problems with each other. Now, we've built some culturally defined systems to do that, but we haven't gotten to the point where we think about this more as human, as what it means to be human, and sort of the multifaceted human nature of all of us on the entire globe, regardless of what our cultural background is. And frankly, we've done a lot of great damage at prioritizing certain cultures over others, and that includes the culture of educational elites. And we're seeing resistance and backlash against educational elites, against all these different kind of cultural divisions and distinctions that are being made. And I think it suggests that the tie between our body of knowledge, what we consider intelligent, and what we consider, the valuable culture versus invaluable culture, is running thin. I mean, it's running to the end of its ability to sustain itself. And I think it's, there's a lot of threats, even in the United States, let alone around the world, as cultures compete with one another, that are, products of the 20th century and kind of this whole modern age, that are being strained. And I think it would be helpful for all of us to do more to understand the multifaceted nature of human intelligence, rather than just continuing to rank ourselves on one narrow form, especially when the machines probably rank first. How do I actualize it? I think, it's things we know how to do in schools, which we have, project-based learning, group work to solve authentic problems. Those kinds of things, we've long known that they help people learn more, and we've known that they engage students more, and that they have, real practical benefits but we've called them soft skills. And so, one thing I don't want to do is keep calling them soft skills. The ability to reflect, and then the ability to reflect collaboratively, and the ability to make decisions. And frankly, at the end of that, to say, we don't agree, but we know now what we don't agree on and why. And so we can move forward with that to solve problems, knowing that we don't agree on things. That I think is the foremost important skill that we need to be developing to establish that agency. And we owe it to people who are graduating from K-12 education in our society to make sure they have developed and practiced that agency.
So, Alan, when you're talking about student agency, and I think there's obviously a connection and a concern over student misuse or irresponsible use of AI tools in terms of taking away that agency, and a lot of it is driven by motivation. So this implicit connection between developing student agency and also developing intrinsic motivation in students is a pretty important one. If we're thinking about a model by which students gain that agency, if they're able to develop their own motivation for moving forward, you just outline some practical applications in the classroom, largely driven by the instructor. What about for the student? If you were advising a high school student currently, what habits of mind or skills would you suggest they work on to make sure they're able to thrive, maybe in an AI influenced world, or maybe just the AI influenced classroom? How do they claim some of that student agency for themselves? How do they develop that motivation? And obviously, it's going to be limited or supported by the instructor, by the educator. But what can they do in their own role?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think they can definitely put their time on things that matter to them. So what are they concerned about? If they're concerned about what their future career is, then make that the question. And I mean, like the instructor could do it, but the student can do it too. You don't have to do it in school. And frankly, with the AI tools and so on, like you can build this from scratch as a student. So what are my future career possibilities? And you can, you know, you can have a conversation with a natural language model and hear what it thinks. And then you can like take those ideas and go ask your teacher, and take those ideas and go ask your friends and start to have a conversation and start to build some solutions. I think one thing we definitely have gotten away from, if we have, maybe I'll just say we don't do it, is we're not very solution oriented. We do a lot of identifying, who's intelligent, who isn't, who's this, who's that, who's for this, who's for that. And the reason we can do that is because we know the body of knowledge, and we can say, well, you align with it or you don't. The biggest motivation for all of this is that there is no way to go forward and say, I know that this is true. And it's true for all time, capital T. We really didn't know that before, but we established a cultural body of knowledge that we took for true, and we had a lot of heuristics attached to that, like, if it's peer reviewed, we've gone through that process, then it's probably true. If the New York Times wrote it, or whatever paper you trust, well, they have an editorial process, a review process. What are we saying? We're saying like things that are true go through a process where lots of people put their eyes on it and interact about it and talk about it, and then they conclude that it's useful. And we've conflated that with true. Well, everybody needs to be able to do that. Everybody needs to be able to have a conversation, interact with around something to determine if it's useful. Because I guarantee you that you can be fooled by artificial intelligence. I mean, we already have, obviously a spate of false citations that make it into, professional papers and the like, or, deep fake videos that, simply can't be distinguished. You see it, if there's a deep fake video that comes out from one side of a political question, not deep fake, if it's like a live video of a real thing that happened and it's shown, and it, the other side, it reflects badly on the other side, we already hear them just say, well, it's AI. And dismissing it. And that becomes an argument that a lot of people accept, even if it's not true. And there's no way to really verify that once it gets up into the internet and the ethersphere. And so, I don't want to, I'm not rejecting truth. This is not a post-truth argument. I think there are good things. I think there are true things. There are beautiful things. But what matters for, intelligence, which is something that we say we want to have, is whether or not we can work with other people to bring our different experiences to bear on that, and determine what's useful and what's helpful for the community we want to shape. And I guess the last thing that I would say, the most important thing that I would say that students could do if they want to prepare for this future world and develop their agency, is to spend a lot of time talking with people who they disagree with about why they disagree, and learning to have those conversations, and also learning from those conversations, being open to listening to other people's perspectives. And honestly, that, obviously our society will work more effectively that way. But I think that's the basis of future knowledge as well. And the intelligent person will be the person who can listen to the most people and process and integrate their experiences into what the original person knows, and work together to come up with solutions. I think that's intelligence.
Good advice, not just for the students, but for the rest of us as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one theme that kind of emerges a little bit, and Anand brought it up kind of at the beginning. We talk about preparing students for the future, right? A lot of it's focused on economics. Obviously, you want to have economic stability, or you're going to struggle kind of in other parts of your life as well, right? So that's important, right? We want people to be happy, right? So, there's a lot of different kind of intelligences that we could develop, in people, right? And I think it's, people are in school for, I mean, it varies, right? But most people are in school till they're 18, right? And then, half of them, at least in the developed world, kind of go beyond that, but they don't all finish, right? So kind of that it gets me thinking about there's other ways, we really think of learning as something that happens in school, and there's a lot of kind of just kind of ideation that kind of centers around that, right? But people obviously learn in other places, right? Even a little more formally, they might be in some kind of club, right? That's not school based. They're on a sports team that's not school. There's some philanthropic organization that's supporting their learning, but they're also learning like in their everyday interactions. I saw a post earlier today by someone who's excited he got a job at Google. And he said, "Oh, well, what really got me this job at school, Google was like, I learned math in school. That was important, but that's not really what got me the job. It was all the stuff I learned outside of school, kind of interacting with other people, right? Because probably a lot of people who applied for the job, they probably could do the math or whatever what was required, right? And probably he's saying, well, I think I got this because, of the way I interacted. So I kind of also, if you've given thought to like how because we work in schools, do work with schools, right? All those types of things. Even a lot of our thinking is kind of school driven. But to kind of get to the question, have you kind of thought about like how schools could help set students and people up just generally to think more about learning outside of school and enable them to learn outside of school? And part of that maybe is lifelong learning. People are talking about that now in terms of continual credits. You could go to Mary Washington forever, right? They should offer lifelong learning. Sure, okay, that's one thing. But I think it's more that we want to empower people to be lifelong learners outside of school.
Yeah. To start with, I would bring the real problems and issues and challenges that they are facing right now into school. And we're reluctant to do that. We're very reluctant to bring hot button issues or controversial issues or things that matter on a daily basis to kids into school. But we should do that. That's number one. And those should be the authentic problems that we're tackling in school, and they should be resolving those. And while they're doing that, teachers have plenty of opportunity to add their experience, which happens to be based on their education in their lives as well. So they can add more value, they can learn more. That's where the content mastery comes in, but they're applying it in things that matter to them. So they're developing agency. That's number one. Number two, students should have a much greater role in shaping what the school itself is all about. There should be, I mean, that is their community. They live there more than they live anywhere else. And the teachers, live there with them. And so this is a perfect environment in which the students should be shaping what happens in the school. They should be working with adults to shape that, which is teaching them the ability to apply that agency intergenerationally. So they're expanding the differences that they're learning from. So I think that there are some really good, kind of programs and ways to do that, to put that into the school. But, let's start with that basic assumption that this is their community, and they should shape that community by and large. Just because how can they go to a community where older people shape it the whole time? Then they get out into society and like all of a sudden they're being asked to build a community. No wonder that falls a little bit shorter. It takes time, or they're not really, or frankly, we elect people who are over 80 all the time because, we just defer and defer and defer to the older people because that's what we're taught in school. So that's the second thing. They should own that school community and, learn how to shape it and learn that their choices make an impact on their experiences. And then lastly, we need to acknowledge that it's not like they're not learning. Okay, kids don't want to go to school anymore because school isn't engaging them in those authentic problems. But they're learning, they're communicating, and they're talking. They just happen to be doing it almost exclusively on phones where the algorithms are continuing to drive them apart. And I'm not, like, woe is me, let's kill the algorithms. It's easy enough to, say, as long as you acknowledge and realize I'm only hearing things that I agree with already. How do I find ways to engage with people I disagree with? How do I even find what they're thinking? How do I even listen to the other side? Those are things schools could and should be teaching students. Okay. What do? We take the phones away. Okay. I mean, that is just like banning AI. It's just kicking the can down the road. And eventually they're going to be out of school and they're going to have the phone back. Now, what are they going to do with the phone? They're going to rely on the algorithm. And, so schools have an opportunity to say, hey, this is how algorithms work. This is why you think everybody agrees with you and you're right. And anybody who's on the other side is stupid. Here's what you need to do to engage them. Here's some places you can go to find something that's different from what you've heard before. We can practice that on your phone. We can, practice seeing it on the internet. And then we can actually have some conversations in class. And it's just got to be a laboratory for learning to build community. I mean, I used to say when I first got involved with kind of school policy that public schools were the place where we work out what kind of community we want to be in the future. And that's true. And it's never going to not be true, because those are the kids who are going into the future. Now we're fragmenting that a little bit. So I would, obviously I would broaden that to include private schools, or home schools, or any other places. Where are the kids who are going to be the community? They're working it out. And, if we're not interacting with one another in schools, we're going to build communities like that where we don't interact with each other in the future. And so I just think we need to take that seriously. Because that's a huge opportunity, and it's a huge missed opportunity that I think is resulting in a lot of the things we see in our society these days, because we've just neglected that. And frankly, we've out of fear that students might hear a controversial idea, we have refused to give them opportunities to learn, to have a voice, use it in agency to build a community that they want to live in. And that we can do that in school. It's low stakes. It's not, the end of the world. And they can take on different ideas when they're in school, and they can try out different ideas and learn from one another and figure out what they want to be. And you can't stop them from doing that. They're going to do it. The only question is whether they do it well or not. And we need to do a much better job in schools, giving them opportunities to practice and do it well, rather than just taking away their phones.
Yeah, because it seems like, maybe we want to take away the phones because, we had kind of the adult algorithm in control before, right? Like it was kind of the, maybe the controlled curriculum was another kind of algorithm, and now they're on this social media algorithm, and we've kind of lost control. So if we take the phone away, then we kind of get our control back, at least for 6 or 7 hours. But yeah, that's the one thing that always bothered me about the phone debate. Wasn't even like, well, is it good to have the phones? And it gets so bifurcated. Like, are you arguing that a kid should just look on their phone while they're learning their math? No. my kind of point is that, like, if you don't work with them and they don't kind of learn how to use the phone in a productive way and kind of integrate it, then yeah, as soon as the school day's over, what do you see the kids do? They just get right back on the phone, right? And we haven't really accomplished anything except they learned some vacuum, it's some one thing in a vacuum. But yeah, I don't want to divert this into a conversation about phones.
Well, that's just one example. There are hundreds.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
our age discrimination against kids is one of the fully tolerated and enforced discriminations in our society. Even when you're learning about anti-discrimination law, there is age discrimination if you're over 40. But if you're under 18, we just assume that, like, whatever you say about what kids need and what they need to be sheltered from and protected from, but that's just not how learning occurs. And they won't be sheltered and protected from it forever. And look, I mean, I've had experience with ideas. I mean, I guess I'm under no illusions that this is something that we can do in our current environment. The curriculum has to change. How we teach has to change. How we treat students, in other words, what role we give to students in schools have to change. These are fundamental changes. They're not really actually hard, but because they're so baked into our society, and what you said at the beginning, all our value systems are based on this one way of knowing, all our economic systems, frankly, all of our biases are based on this one way of knowing. We need a much more multifaceted and pluralistic set of ways of knowing and ways of interacting with one another. And school is the time to practice. And we give away those 18 years and then expect people to figure those pieces out on their own because they know the Pythagorean theorem. And I just, that doesn't speak to me as something that is preparing students well for the future. And it doesn't speak to students that way either. They're smarter than that. They know that that's not really something that they're going to be able to bring to bear by and large, except in some narrow specific uses. And don't hear me wrong. people should learn that who are interested in that, moving in that direction. But that should come out of first that crucible of learning to build a community where they are.
Alan, really what we're looking at is this inflexibility in education. I think that we're kind of hardened the curriculum, hardened the approach. We don't, and if anything, some of the guardrails that you're kind of talking about, the worry about threats coming in and dangerous ideas, have only further hardened the curriculum. When we think about higher ed, some of that isn't even by design. Change happens very slowly in higher education. If we're looking at some of the challenges presented by AI, what do you think are the biggest risks for higher education if these institutions fail to adapt to the challenges presented by AI?
Well, it's an extended version. I mean, I spend a lot of time talking about K through 12 because that's the bulk of my work, but it's just an extended version of that, which is, to what extent is that knowledge useful in the agency that students are going to use when they get out into society? And there's lots of questions, some right, some wrong, about that value already. And I think I think those questions are coming from a narrow set of lenses and not this more overarching overarching thing here. Universities and colleges can and should continue to develop knowledge, things that we know, things that are useful that can help to inform agency or help to inform problem solving and decisions. And I don't mean just purely technical. I mean, I think this is much more purely liberal arts. Instead of liberal arts in some ways being reduced to a collection of disciplines that have a hard time talking to one another, and it's an interdisciplinary moment when we bring ourselves together, or ultimately value in the university is determined by your mastery of that discipline by and large. And the liberal arts, what's in the trivia, and what's missing, sort of rhetoric, like where does that come in, and what does it mean? What is rhetoric, and how does it bring together, kind of the other aspects of knowledge and make that knowledge usable? Like, where is the application part? That's what the liberation of liberal arts is really about. And so, I mean, I think it carries a lot of hope for the future of liberal arts. That's why I really, like the center and am excited to be doing a talk in connection with the center, because I think, the liberal arts is just going to look differently than we have come to understand it over the last 50 years, maybe 100 years. I can only speak for 50. But I mean, that application, that use of the body of knowledge, like, it's important to generate knowledge, but it is also important to figure out how that knowledge needs to be brought to bear on specific solutions. And sometimes we leave that out, or we don't do enough of that, or we prioritize, the knowledge and the mastery of the knowledge over the problem solving. My experience in schools was odd. I mean, I didn't have a great educational foundation, but I learned what I learned in debate. And, debating and dialogue is the kind of thing I'm talking about here. I think we can do a lot more with it. But, when you're on the hook to solve a problem and somebody else is on the hook to question whether your solution is any good or even necessary, that can go in so many different directions. And I think even within competitive debate, we've been very narrow in the end in terms of how we let those conversations evolve. And we need to be much more open about letting those conversations evolve in those spaces that we have for students to practice. So I think that same thing is true in the university. I think it's consistent with the liberal arts. I fear I might also wind up with hemlock at the end for corrupting the youth. But I do think that's that's the hope for the future of the university. Continue to generate knowledge, continue to investigate, continue to research, but don't make the research an end in itself. Focus on the applications, focus on the problems, the big knotty problems that we're trying to solve in society. That's what universities do well. And when they're doing that, then I think there's a lot of value that our society reaps from those universities and those university experiences. And when students are able to engage in that kind of problem solving, that application of knowledge, rather than just having to master it in the sense of being able to repeat it or share it back, I think we'll be better off.
Yeah, it seems that like, in school, right? Okay, you learn a lot of content, but one of the things you do learn kind of reasonably well is how to learn content, right? Because so much of what you're doing is learning content, right? So you can get better at that. And over maybe the last 20, 30 years, even with changes to the SAT, they've added in reasoning. It's kind of almost shocking that, there's a big deliberation about like kind of adding reasoning and argumentation, right, to the SAT. That got added in, right? But there's not like an equal, or maybe we should have more emphasis on, like you say, like problem solving or interacting with people who are different than you are, right? Like, because communities, they're kind of isolated, right? Even in public schools, right? I mean, there's a lot of socioeconomic isolation within the school, right? So, or people who choose now, all the different specialized charter schools, right? For different reasons. But I think if people had more experiences in those processes where they're problem solving, working with groups, arguing through things that are different with them, they can take them with them and maybe to the universities. And I do wish universities were more kind of open, right, to kind of thinking through these things and what it means with AI. Because I'm thinking, well, if anyone should be able to, help with this transition to an AI world, it should be people who went to school for 20, often until they're 30 years old, right? And are in environments where they're constantly learning and researching, and then, have studied the history of the world and all the ideas and the humanities, and, are aware of the most cutting edge technologies, right? Like those have to be the places where the ideas are coming from, and every idea is not going to be a good one, and that's no offense to anything. I've had plenty of bad ideas, right? But it seems that universities really need to kind of start stepping up to the plate with some creativity, because if not, it's not that AI is going to go away. All the ideas, and I think we're actually starting to see this, all the ideas are going to be pushed on us, and you could say forced on us, and maybe that's even starting to happen. All those ideas are going to be pushed on us by a limited number of players.
I mean, you said that people have learned to learn content well, and I think I would question that. I think some people have, and we value them because they are able to learn content in a way that enables them to get an A in class, which enables them to then go on and get a degree, which gives them a potential to get jobs that are associated with the kind of learning and content knowledge that caused them to get an A in a class in the first place, and which relates to what they're already able to do. And that's an example of kind of narrowing intelligence and valuing a certain kind of intelligence. I never learned to memorize well. I have memorized things, but it's not easy for me. And even when I've memorized it, I don't think about it ever in the abstract. I only bring it to mind when it's useful. Now, there are little pieces in there, so it is important to be exposed to lots of things. And all of this is being exposed to things. But these books, every one of these books, I have purchased in response to wanting to know something. So my desire to learn precedes my ability to learn.
Alan, we really appreciate the time that you've given us. I think we have, if you don't mind, maybe one more last quick question. And this is some advice for higher ed faculty. Many are really feeling overwhelmed by AI, not sure how to grapple with it. If you had some advice to encourage faculty, something that they could start doing initially, maybe this semester or maybe to get to plan for the spring, what advice would you give them about dealing with AI, addressing AI, working with AI?
Well, I think I'm conscious of the fact that what I'm suggesting is you have to change the world. And as teachers, it's hard enough to change Monday. So I would encourage people not to let themselves become overwhelmed by the ideal or let the ideal be the enemy of the good, and to see what they can do to pursue a few basic things. And that is, are the students exhibiting and demonstrating some agency over what's happening in the class? Do they have some element of control? Can they give feedback? How do we act on that feedback? Or even better, could the students spend some time talking about the experience in class and how it could be better? Could they suggest some ways? Could they do some data gathering with their peers and make some recommendations? What ownership do they have in the class? What stake do they have in that experience? And then related to that, they can begin to tackle the problem. I think what this kind of question usually kind of speaks to is we put such expectations on our teachers and our professors that they're supposed to have all the answers because we have this content mastery definition of intelligence. And instead, it enables the teachers to ask more good questions, like ask the question, hey, AI is ubiquitous. These are my assignments. You could do all of those with AI. How can we change these assignments in order to use AI more effectively, or to give you some opportunity to explore solutions that would be different, or even just to give you interest beyond just generating an answer to try to get a grade? And make that the project, make that the work, and roll up your sleeves with them and work with them. Show that different people have different perspectives, and it's not that some people are intelligent and other people aren't, and we should follow the intelligent people. That's a shift in kind of, where we get our value as professors and as teachers too. But it is, I think, much more in keeping with what we think the human mind really is about. And frankly, the reality of, at the end of the day, we're going to just have to take it. We're just going to have to listen to what we hear from an artificially generated source or from somebody who has more power than we do, rather than being able to contribute to it. I think, anything we can do to reverse the experience of being out of control and having to master somebody else's intelligence and replace that with, we're part of a general intelligence that is going to be shaped together and applied together. We're going to learn what we need to solve the problems that are in front of us, the better. And so I think as close to the class, as close to the daily experience as possible you can get, that's great. And then, from there, what are the real problems and challenges on the horizon that are out there in society we have to deal with? Now, we're going to have to get over ourselves on the question of dealing with controversial or hot button topics and talking to people who disagree with us. Those, to me, are the two most important things that educators can do. And we're going to have to get the politicians to let us do that. But we're also going to then have to turn over to the students, like, what is your role in this? How can you also help to contribute to the solutions that we need to have in this class and otherwise? And so, pare it down, get to the how do we change Monday, but then really empower the students to have a responsibility in that. Your grade in this class is based on your responsibility and your ability to contribute to the formation of a productive learning community here.
That's excellent. Really starting to set the foundation. I like those first steps. Give some real access points. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Great conversation, really a lot for us to think about. And I can't wait until we welcome you on campus on October 29th at 7 p.m. If you're watching this, find your way to Fredericksburg, because you're going to want to hear Alan talk more about the talk titled Reclaiming Human Intelligence in the Age of AI, Plural Futures for Education and Society. So we hope you'll join us, what I'm sure will be a really thought-provoking and inspiring and engaging evening. Thanks again, Alan. We appreciate it.
Thank you.